I'm so grateful that you have joined us for these moments today. Today I'm joined by Dr. Will Cogburn. Dr. Cogburn is going to share with us a little bit about where we are in our process of conversation, about relaunching the ministries and eventually worship in the church. He's set aside some time today to talk with us and share some important information, and I know that you'll want to pay close attention. I want to begin by saying thank you.
Oh, it's my privilege, Robin, to be here with you.
So very grateful that you could be here today.
Thank you for asking me.
Certainly. I know that you and your wife Diane worship with us at our 9 o'clock worship service, our contemporary service in TFEC. And so you are a part of our community of faith.
Absolutely, and we can't wait to get back together. So we've been missing it. But we have enjoyed the video stream. So.
Oh, thank you. I'm so grateful that we've had the opportunity to worship online. And I know it's not the same as being close together. It's good to see you. It's good to see anyone up close and personal.
Well, that's why we're here tonight. We wanted to start talking about how church is going to look and what we need to do to get ready for our corporate worship again.
Wonderful. Well, in that regard, let me ask you a question. We are socially distanced. We're physically distanced from one another.
We are, and since we're socially distanced, I think we should take our mask off.
Oh, thank you.
So we'll be good. And the reason why we can do that is because we've got a nice distance here, and we're the only people in the room. So the room is not crowded. If we were in a meeting room where there was multiple other folks in there socially distanced, we probably should keep our mask on. So.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to take my mask off. I am super careful about wearing it wherever I go. Although, I'll be honest, I haven't been very far.
Well, I've got to wear one for about 8 hours a day now, so I'm used to it.
Well, a welcome break for you
yes,
then.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Cogburn, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and particularly some of the expertise that you bring to our relaunch guide team?
Well, it's exciting. A few years ago, I went back and got my master's in public health up at USF. And so at that time, we studied about pandemics, obviously. So it was a good time. I really enjoyed that. So that gives me a little bit of extra knowledge as far as being able to look at what's going on globally as well as locally.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, help us to understand. We get a lot of data from the television and from the newspaper, and all sorts of resources are available. It seems like there are thoughts and opinions and even data to support just about everything and anything. But we need to know what's really going on, particularly here in our own community.
Yes, well, as you know, we've been suffering with this now since, really the end of January, 1st of February, when it first came out. And, we expect to see more of a more sharp peak in Florida back early on, back in April timeframe. But it really never occurred because of what actually some of the things that were put in place. People were pretty good at listening to the advice as far as social distancing, wearing the mask, staying at home, staying safe at home guidelines. But unfortunately, what's happened in Florida, when things started getting reopened back up over the last 6 weeks, we've seen a pretty significant uptake in the number of cases. Right. Over the last couple of days in particular, Florida's had obviously more cases per day than we've had any time during this. And it's also concerning because if you look at the national averages, the U.S. averages have been hitting high numbers each and every day too. And it's interesting because it's been a transformation is where the pandemic has been most active. And as we've seen the numbers go down in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, up in the Northeast, we've seen an uptake in the cases in the Sun Belt, primarily Florida, Texas, Arizona.
Right. We have noticed that.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of reasons why that's happening, including the fact that folks are becoming more mobile. It's summertime and we all want to be outside.
Absolutely, we all want to be outside. Right. So that's been part of the problem that we've had, I think, with the uptake in cases in Florida is people are out, and I think some people are kind of wary of staying at home, so everybody's wanting to get out, and I think people have been kind of wanting to forget about it. Unfortunately, the virus is not going away. We can't stick our head in the sand. It's going to be here with us for some time. So we need to try to learn how to mitigate the risk and to try to get back to as much normal as we can. It's going to be a different normal.
It definitely is going to be a different normal. On Tuesday evening of this past week, our church council met together, and our relaunch guide team made a presentation that described a step-by-step process that would help us to re-enter ministry, to re-enter our spaces, and to eventually get to a place where we can begin to worship together. That meeting entailed a great deal of discussion, and ultimately our church council decided that it was appropriate and necessary for us to be both cautious and careful in taking the next steps. In that process, they decided that we can take one small step in the direction of getting together again. And that means that beginning July 1st, we're going to begin to allow small groups to gather here on our campus. Groups of 10 or fewer with a limited time span and a specific purpose. Some of our groups, some of our small groups, would like to be able to gather together for a time of prayer. Our AA groups and our Al-Anon groups would like to be able to move indoors. They've been meeting outdoors. Right. And it's summer. It's getting hotter, and the rain is certainly around where all. And the mosquitoes, yeah. Well, help us to understand why we're taking this kind of step-by-step, beginning with the smallest group approach.
Well, first of all, we need to be cautious. We know that, and that's really based upon it being cautious, is that's what Jesus would do. Jesus would be cautious. Jesus would look at the data, look at, he's given us our ability to examine, the science, the data, how this virus is being transmitted, and he wants us to be cautious because we need to take care of the least of these. If we don't think everything through, we could do more harm than good. So we really want to try to minimize the risk when we start gathering together again. And so that's why the relaunch team has put some things in place. For the step one, we're going to have some special conditions, which means everybody in the facility is going to wear their mask at all times. Everybody's going to be appropriately social distanced. We're going to limit the rooms, capacity of the rooms to fit the people, 10 people or less in the smaller rooms for the first step. We're going to emphasize the need for hygiene, hand sanitation, hand washing. And really the fourth pillar that we need to think about is we need to have the sense that really your health is important to me. And if your health is important to me, I'm going to always assess my health because I'm not going to want to come out to the meeting if I have any type of respiratory symptoms. I've been dealing with the virus, at work now for 4 months. And so every morning when I wake up, the first thing I do, I lay in bed and I check, how's my throat feel? How's my nose feel? How does, do I have a cough? So I try to go through my little checklist in my mind and say, do I feel 100%? Could I be coming down with something? Because if I'm coming down with something, it's my duty to stay at home and get evaluated, not to come out to church or to the church meeting or to go to work. So I think that's the mindset we also need to have too.
Wonderful. I hear you say that, and as you do, I sense your care and your concern, not just for your own well-being, but also for my well-being.
Absolutely.
And that's what this is about.
And I think that's part of what, when I walk around town and I see things that are being done out in the community, that's what's upsetting to us, to my wife and I. If and I talk about this, is the fact that we should all care. I mean, Jesus tells us that we need to take care of the least of these as if we're taking care of him. And he also tells us we have to love our neighbor. And so your health, or the person that I'm passing on the sidewalk or passing in the aisle in Publix, their health is important to me. And that's very well based upon what Jesus would do.
Yeah, I heard somebody the other day say that love wears a mask.
That's great. I love it.
Yeah, kind of like a superhero.
Right.
You know, superheroes wear
Right.
masks, and so do Christians who love one another and
Absolutely.
seek to care for others in their communities. So I'm grateful for that advice. I have another question about why we're doing it step by step. Why can't we start with worship?
Great question. We want to get back to worship as soon as we can.
That's what we all want.
But we want to take it step by step so that we can be sure that we can be successful with the small groups and the small things first. That's one part of it. The other part of it is there's quite a few things that logistically we need to get in place before we can come back for corporate worship. We need to think about and get our seating situated and figure out how the best way to do the seating. We have logistical things as far as the inflow and the outflow of folks. We have some new training that we're going to have as far as a community wellness team, which will be kind of like an ushers that are going to help with our mitigation protocols. And so we have quite a few things that we need to kind of check off and get done before we can get back to corporate worship. But what we're hopeful is that we can get these things done in the next few weeks and get back at it.
Yeah, I know I'm looking forward to the time when we can get back together again. But I'm willing to be patient too,
That's good.
because it requires a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that we look at this, the more important it is going to be for us to get things right.
Correct.
We aren't going to get a second chance
No, we're not.
at doing it the first time.
Yeah. And from what we've seen over the last couple of months, unfortunately, worship in a church is a high-risk area for transmission of the virus. It has to do with our close contact, and it also has to do with singing. And so these are things that we're going to have to think through and be sure we have everything in place to try to mitigate those risks.
Right. Dr. Cogburn, you play on the praise team.
Yes.
And you're part of the band. You're not one of the singers, but you are there on the platform with others while people are singing. And you've talked about the extra risk that is involved in projecting our voices, not just in singing, but also in speaking.
Correct.
And so I'm grateful that we're taking our time because I think it's going to be so important for us. We live in a community that is diverse. There are younger folks and not so young folks, and a lot of folks have what you often refer to as special conditions that make them even more at risk. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. We've known from the start of this virus that the people that are most at risk is really basically like a chronic disease. And a chronic disease would be people with diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, any type of chronic lung disease, people with asthma, COPD, obviously people that are immunosuppressed, people that have rheumatological reasons to have immunosuppression, people with cancer that are immunosuppressed. And then there's also people that weight can be a factor too. So there's a lot of different risks that put you in a high risk to having a poor outcome if you got infected with the virus. And so you're right, that makes up a good part of all of us. So that's why we need to, again, try to take care of the least of these.
Yeah. Well, I've been working on one of those conditions recently myself. I've changed my eating habits a bit, and things are getting better, but I'm not where I want to be. What I do understand is that I don't have any of those chronic diseases that would lead me to believe that I am at particular risk. But I do know that some of my closest friends and even some of my family members have got circumstances and issues that make them vulnerable. I think it's important that we pay attention not just to ourselves, but also to those who are in our households.
Absolutely, because that's what happens. If you go out somewhere, you contract the virus, you might, as we know, upwards to 35 to 40% of people who get infected with the coronavirus might not have any symptoms. And so you could easily...
Wait a minute, say that again?
Well, that's what the studies have shown, that upwards to 35, 40% of people that get infected will really not have a lot of symptoms with it. Maybe no symptoms or very minimal symptoms.
So 40% of the people who diagnose positive don't know they have the virus?
Well, the problem is catching those people, right? Because they're not, up until now, we've got more thorough testing, those people are getting tested, but early on, those people couldn't be tested because they didn't have symptoms. The indication for testing were to test people with symptoms. But yeah, the studies have shown, both in China and in Europe, and of course now in the US, that a good bit of people will get infected, will not have any symptoms. And the problem with the virus is we can transmit the virus, but we don't have symptoms. And so that's what's scary.
You talked about that at our meeting the other night, how this virus, this coronavirus, because this isn't the first coronavirus,
It's not.
but you talked about how this coronavirus is different than the ones that we've seen in the past.
Yes, and that's the reason why it's been such a problem. The first coronavirus, SARS-1, was SARS back in 2003. That was the first time we had a coronavirus that was called SARS, a severe respiratory virus. And so that virus was pretty easy to control because you didn't start spreading that disease. You weren't contagious until you got symptoms. And so we learned very early on with that disease, with SARS-1 back in 2003, that once you had any symptoms, scratchy throat, cough, fever, chills, achiness, you would self-quarantine. And so it was very simple. If you got symptoms, you stayed at home and you didn't get anybody else sick. The problem with this virus is you get it, you don't have any symptoms, and then you're spreading it without knowing it.
So even though we're doing that self-check each day that helps us to know whether or not we ought to go out, even if we do that and we assess that everything is fine, we still may be spreading the virus?
Absolutely, and that gets back to the need for a mask and the need to social distance. So, because we have to assume that anybody you run into could potentially be sick with this virus.
Okay, and not even know it.
Not even know it.
So it's not like we're intentionally being disobedient or obstinate. It's that we can be carriers.
Correct.
Without even being asymptomatic carriers. That's an important thing to understand, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. It's important for us as we begin to think about gathering together again for worship. There's not going to be a time in the near future in which we can gather together and assume that just because we woke up feeling well, we are well, right?
That's correct. With this virus, it's going to be that way. And the same could be said about sometimes with colds and even the flu. You can transmit that right before you get sick with the flu. You could be transmitting the flu, but the flu still doesn't kill as many people as have been killed by this. So it is different.
So this is different than the flu.
It is different, yes.
Yeah, most people don't end up in the hospital with the flu unless they become dehydrated or have some other problems, right?
Right, yes. The flu does have its related seasonal mortality every year if you look at the global mortality from the flu in the United States, but this virus is much more deadly than the flu.
Wow, that gives us reason to be cautious and careful as we step into these next things. Dr. Cogburn, I think that for me, as I begin to imagine us worshiping together again someday, I imagine that there are some things that people are going to find uncomfortable and different. I mean, wearing a mask isn't something that we're used to.
That's correct.
But it's something that we're going to require. Staying separated from one another, not hugging and not shaking hands, is not something that we're used to. But we're going to ask folks to do that.
We sure are. We have to. Because again, it's back to our basis of Christian love. I care about your health. I want to keep you healthy.
Yeah. John Wesley had 3 simple rules. The first one is said to be, do no harm. And I think about that, and I think of the Hippocratic Oath.
Absolutely.
The oath that you take as a physician.
I'll take it when I graduate from medical school. That's the first thing you do, is do no harm.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so that's step 1. Do nothing that will cause anyone else harm. And then after that, John Wesley talks about how we are to do good. To do good for the sake not only of ourselves, but for the sake of others. again, masks and avoiding certain behaviors
That's doing
that
good.
will endanger us. I think those are important things. And then, most of all, the third thing is to stay in love with God. It's been more difficult than ever to stay in love with God. We feel as though we've been tested in ways that we never imagined.
Mm-hmm.
Things that we took for granted about our faith and our community have changed. And so I'm wondering, what are you doing in these days to stay in love with God?
Well, it gets back to how I practice my faith individually at home. As far as my quiet time, reading my Bible, you can have your little mini prayers when you're going through your day as far as the things that you're thinking about, the people that we have on our hearts that we're praying for. So all those things. And really, I've tried to, when I think about God, I try to think about how I see God in other people too. So, that's always brings my heart. It gets back to one of my favorite passages is what you talked about, Matthew 25, when I see the least of these, it's the beauty. We're seeing Jesus, we need to see Jesus in the people that we're around.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard to find good in people.
Yeah, sometimes it is. So I have one more question to ask you. There will come a day when we begin to take the next steps, when we allow larger groups, and then eventually when we begin to gather for corporate worship. When do you think you're going to be comfortable gathering together again?
I think because of the work that the relaunch team is doing, with the commitment that we have here in our community, the community of Grace United Methodist Church, I think I'm going to be ready to worship whenever we get back together. Because I think we're doing our diligence. We're going to be careful, take it slow as we talked about, and we're going to have the best systems in place to make it as safe as possible. So I'll be ready to go when we're ready to go.
All right. Do you think that's the same answer that everyone ought to have?
I don't know. I don't think everybody needs to have that answer, because I think people will have a different level of security. But I think that's what part of us doing the video tonight and talking about these issues. We want people to know that we're taking this carefully, lovingly, thoughtfully to try to put everything in place. So some people, if somebody has a little bit more of immune suppression and had more risk, they probably should wait and see how things go. The other thing that we're going to be looking at, that we haven't mentioned yet tonight, is our committee is going to continue to look at the numbers every week to see what's happening in Sarasota County. We can go on the Department of Health website and get the Sarasota County numbers, even the numbers by zip codes every week. And so that's another part that we're going to put into our relaunch programming to try to see how things are going. Because we might need to take a few steps forward, and we might have to take a step back if things worsen. We don't want that to happen, but we need to be conscious of what's going on in the community.
Right. Currently, our state government and the CDC recommend that those who are over the age of 65 stay safe at home, regardless of health condition. And I think for us, we take that seriously. And to open the church and say, y'all come, seems a bit short-sighted when we've been instructed otherwise.
That's correct. And that's why we need to, again, be sure we do everything we can to kind of put things in place to try to help protect folks. That's correct. I mean, I think really when you look at the demographics, if you look at how things have gone, when people were really serious about this 2.5, 3 months ago, we flattened the curve. We were successful. If you look at the success that we've had in New York, look at the New York numbers over the last couple of weeks. It's been incredible what they've done up in the Northeast as far as getting the cases down.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm afraid that people have kind of been too lax about it in the community. So we don't want to do that here. We want to stay safe here at church too.
Yeah, I know that we've gotten some feedback that other churches are opening, and I understand that. I've tried to be honest with folks and say, the decisions that we make, we are going to make for the sake of the community that gathers here. We're not making decisions for other churches, and we're not allowing them to make decisions for us. And that's why I'm so grateful that you and a handful of other folks who bring their own expertise to our work.
We've got a great team.
We do have a great team.
Yeah.
And I'm just grateful for the honesty and the diligence of every person who is there, that we can talk about these things openly, and we can disagree and still keep at the forefront our commitment to doing no harm and to doing everything that we can to help people to journey through this in a way that's healthy.
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Cogburn, I am so very grateful for you sharing some time with us this evening.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to us being able to gather together in worship whenever the time is right.
I can't wait to start playing bass again, you know that.
I know that. I do.
So thank you.
Oh, could we have a closing prayer?
Absolutely.
Let's do that. Lord God, we are so very grateful for the gifts that you give us each day, for the opportunities that we have to see your face in friends and in strangers around us. God, help us to be responsible as members of your church, as members of your body, not only in our own homes, but in the world around us. Help us to embody our care for you, our love for you, as we wear our masks, as we wash our hands, as we do our best to remain socially distanced from one another, and as we take care of the least of these among us. God, thank you for the gifts of all those who are a part of our Relaunch Guide team, most especially tonight for Dr. Cogburn and his gifts that he shares so freely with us. Bless us and keep us. Use us as you see fit. In Christ's name.